definitely makes you think more about what you're putting in your body.
The fact that I'm now a vegetarian is like shocking even to me.
I'm Heather Grish, and this is the Wisdom of the Body podcast. This podcast explores the idea of body intelligence as the real key to learning the knowledge of life, or what we call Ayurveda in the ancient language of Sanskrit. We do that by connecting with today's creative leaders and experts who will help you listen to your body, trust your gut, and live in deeper harmony with nature. Come join me as we unlock the golden door to clear, direct perception and become very deep listeners. You can find the Wisdom of the Body podcast on Apple, Spotify, and Stitcher. You can also follow us by joining my email at heathergrish.com or on Instagram at heathergrish. I know you're going to love this podcast, so take a second right now to subscribe. Today, I'm here with Carolyn and Blair Warsham, who are the authors of this amazing new book, Eat Plants Every Day, 90 plus flavorful recipes to bring more plants into your daily meals. Thank you so much for joining us, Blair and Carolyn.
Thanks for having us. We're excited to be here.
Wow, you guys are both entrenched in the culinary world and have been for a long time. Carolyn is a career journalist who now manages editorial teams, and she's written a few cookbooks herself, including the Rich Table cookbook and this new cookbook with her husband, Blair Warsham, which is called Eat Plants Every Day. She is now a full-time vegetarian and a lifelong obsessor over all good things to eat. And she was the former Global Cities Director of Eater. And her writing's been featured in San Francisco Chronicle, San Francisco Magazine, Elle Zagat, and many others. Now, Blair is Carolyn's fabulous husband, and I actually happened to meet both Blair and Carolyn in a prenatal couples yoga class before we both had our children. Because our kids are about the same age. And Blair hails from Atlanta, and we call him the Thunder Down Under, the Raz and the Berry, a big old slice of key lime pie. So Blair's a husband, a father, a restaurant consultant, and a chef. And he's the executive chef of Wildseed, which is a critically plant-based restaurant and bar in San Francisco. It is my favorite plant-based restaurant in San Francisco. And he's a consultant for well-known restaurant groups across the country. And his resume consists of Michelin-starred restaurants, such as the restaurant in Meadowood and Campton Place. But he now likes to cook the way he eats, which does not include white tablecloths and fine china. So we are going to dig into how to eat plants every day. And let's just kind of start. First of all, you two did this crazy thing together, a married couple, and you have a small child. You wrote a cookbook together. Why the hell would you do that?
You know what? And we were even locked in a house together at the same time when we were writing it, because this was during COVID lockdown. And that was, so we were living and breathing it. And, we only got in like a couple little disagreements about it.
Yeah, just a couple. I mean, the reason that we did this was that we got approached by a publisher that said, I want to write a vegan cookbook and I want you guys to write it.
And Wildseed had just kind of come into its own and was getting a lot of press and publicity and a lot of great accolades. So yeah, it was all good timing.
It felt like a moment we had to seize. We also just feel so passionately about the impact of this way of eating on the environment. And we know that so many people are curious about it, but unsure about how to make it happen for them in their lives. So that was the void that we really wanted to step into to help people adapt this way of eating and realize that it's not like just reserved for people that wear Birkenstocks and exist in this hippy-dippy niche culture in Berkeley. This can be something that your grandpa in Missouri can adapt, and it can be approachable and it can be really flavorful.
I mean, I don't even say vegan. I say plant-based. To me, Vegan is politically charged. I had a chicken restaurant in Berkeley, and we would have protesters that would come in all the time and shut down the restaurant and block the cash register and all sorts of stuff. And they were vegan protesters because we had chicken. And to me, getting off topic, but I try to steer away from that and just say plant-based. I want to make it more approachable. I want people of multiple generations to give it a try. I mean, let's take the politics out of it, take some of the nonsense and some of those unapproachable components. that are in there. So, I mean, even that was even the approach that came out of Wildseed. I think that's why people love it so much. We just sat down and started trying to make good food that was healthy and make sure it tastes good. That was the first and foremost important component.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm happy you said that because the vegan thing is really tricky for a lot of people. And it can be, I think a lot of people don't eat more plant-based because they feel they have to be perfect. It's sort of like this binary all or nothing thing. And I think where most of us have sort of landed is that we could have a general approach and philosophy of how we want to do this. And occasionally we might veer from that. But, you know, even people who, for say, like their value system are wanting to be vegan, which there are a lot now, and for obviously very good reason. But yeah, that the perfectionist thing is really hard. So I'm excited to dive into this book, and it's now available, the hard copy, at least so far. And it's just a beautiful book and more than 90 recipes. And I can't wait to get into them. And you guys probably remember that I'm not really the greatest cook. And I love to have friends who love to cook because I'm not that great at it. But I'm also, I just want to say congratulations for publishing a book together as a married couple, because I can't even be in the kitchen at the same time as my partner. So the fact that you guys were able to do this together, that's amazing.
We've been in a lot of therapy.
Yeah.
Years and years of therapy.
Yeah. Isn't that a requirement for a marriage?
I think it's pretty positive. I mean,
especially if you're trying to write a cookbook together.
But just in general, I mean, it's certainly helped us.
Oh, yeah.
No question.
It certainly can't hurt. That's for sure.
It's work, but it works.
Carolyn, you're more of a vegan now than Blair is, right?
Correct. Yes. We actually have very different approaches and kind of lifestyles around eating, but we still love the recipes in this book.
When we started Wildseed, there was typically people give me a buzz and say, hey, we're thinking about opening this restaurant and we want you to help concept it. And I had never had any experience with vegan cooking, but I am very passionate about a lot of the components that kind of fold into it, health and, you know, environmental components and things like that. So what we did, the owners of the restaurant and myself and a couple other key players, we all went vegan for 30 days. And to kind of wrap our minds around it as we're starting to flush out this concept. I mean, it is tough. I'm not going to lie. It's tough going out to other restaurants. And we've been back and forth around a number of different states this year. It's brought us some places like Florida and South Carolina visiting family. And it is tough to find vegan options there. So I understand the total intimidation component. So with that, we also, in going those 30 days, a lot of things came to surface and how challenging it is, how accessible to actually find those dishes. And then when you do find them, a lot of them are just weird recipes, stuffed peppers with stuff and weird stuff that just, I don't know.
Don't knock on a stuffed pepper.
I mean, it's
I like a good stuffed pepper every once in a while.
Sure.
I get what you're saying.
Back in the 60s, yes. So we wanted to just approach, you know, dishes that we just love to eat. And with that, we open it up to, you know, an international palate, which I think is more conducive to the American palate. And then it's so easy to cook a lot of Asian stuff, but we tried to swing back into American and Spanish and just kind of all over the place. Just make it good. Just make it approachable. Make it good. Could you bring your dad there? Would you see a group of guys coming into the restaurant? And that has all just kind of come in. Sure, you'll see the groups of girls in yoga pants, but you'll also see the frat guys in there, which is crazy. Blows my mind. And they're in there having drinks and eating all the food and loving it. It's great. So we brought that same approach with a cookbook and cooking at home. And we're cooking for my family and Carolyn's family. And, you know, I remember your cousin came over and we cooked all this Chinese food and his mind was blown that it was all vegan. We stayed with my parents for almost a month during COVID, and my dad's blood pressure went down and his diabetes and his sugar levels almost perfect every day. It was really amazing. So they're pretty committed now to trying to eat more and more. You know, if you can do one meal a day, good on you.
Baby steps.
Yeah. Don't you also feel like there's something about, because I remember I became a vegetarian when I became a yoga teacher, and I became a vegetarian because we had to eat vegetarian at my yoga teacher training. I was the person who smuggled in beef jerky to the retreat center. Yeah, that was really hard for me. But then after I went through that process, for a couple of weeks, it was a month where I was eating only vegetarian food and, just doing a bunch of detox while I was down there. I realized that I felt better, and I realized I liked eating that way better. But the other thing that I realized was that it was really interesting and fun to cook with these ingredients that I wasn't used to, different grains I wasn't used to, different vegetables I hadn't explored. So, you're a chef, Blair, so I know that you've probably come across your share of ingredients. But for most people, would you find that that's one of the interesting things that comes with shifting to a more plant-based diet, is this like newfound discovery of all these new foods?
Well, you have to look at everything holistic with each dish. Protein is what's going to fill you up, protein and carbs. And we make sure there's a lot of protein in this. And when you start going down, all right, what proteins are available, you start looking at different grains. And then maybe, for me, I don't love quinoa, but I think it's important to have it kind of mixed in. So we were mixing, like in the rice, there's a paella dish in there. And we mix in a couple different grains to actually give that balance, to actually give the right flavor profile, but also the right nutrients and protein and everything you're trying to get. So yeah, it is complex, but it definitely makes you think more about what you're putting in your body, because you're trying to balance your diet and actually make sure you're satiated at the end of the meal.
Amazing. Carolyn, you have written about food for a long time, and Blair has been making food for a long time. So I'd love to hear from each of you. Obviously more plant-based is a movement, but how have you each seen the dining scene change in recent years? Maybe locally in the Bay Area or across the country? What have you noticed?
Well, I think the anecdote that Blair just shared really exemplifies it well as it pertains to vegan food, because it's not just pigeonholed into that box that it was in maybe 10 years ago. Like, I find it so validating that Blair sees bachelor parties at Wildseed. Like, it goes to show this sea change happening around vegetarian eating. And it's so exciting. And when we talk to our friends that live in different areas of the country, they perk up when we start discussing things like Beyond Meat and Miyoko's vegan butter. They're genuinely curious and interested in it and ask us tons of questions. So I think that's one big change that is going to be great and just so needed for our global situation right now. The other thing that is pretty big is that the world's getting smaller. You'll notice in a lot of the big food publications like Bon Appetit and Food and Wine, they're overrun by influences and flavors from all over the world. Like gochujang, the Korean spice mix. It's almost like a word that you can rattle off in a sentence, and a lot of people will understand what that is, or at least be interested to learn about it. So I think that sense that the world is getting smaller and that different cultural influences are mixing together and people are learning to expand their horizons is really exciting. It's just such a delicious way to eat too.
Do you both have a favorite recipe from the book?
It's hard to pick.
I don't know. I was just looking through it before we hopped on this call, but I was thinking about the desserts. I really love the desserts. That tres leches is delicious.
Yeah, I love the blueberry jar cakes.
It's really good. I like the way the desserts came out.
Wait, let me tell her why the desserts are so good.
Okay.
The desserts are so good because they're not very sweet. And Blair had a great moment of realization at the restaurant, right? When you lowered the sugar content in your desserts.
Oh, yeah.
And you noticed that people were finishing their plates and ordering them more and just loving them.
Yeah.
So the desserts in the book reflect that. They're a little bit lighter on the sweetness. Like 10 years ago, you might have seen a much more sugar-filled desserts.
Yep.
So I think that's another thing. Like the palate at large is shifting.
Yeah. We dial back the sugar by about 30%, and I do it with all the desserts in the book too. And you're tasting more of whatever it is that's in there rather than just the sugar. It's not the sugar bomb.
Mm-hmm.
And increase a little salinity, and it just, I don't know, things just taste a lot brighter.
Yeah.
It feels like the sugar masks a lot of the flavors, and especially in baked goods.
It's more one note versus multi-note. Mm-hmm. Like when you bite into that blueberry jar cake, you're going to have a lot of blueberries on your spoon, some delicious buckwheat cake, a little bit of sugar, coconut sugar, some sea salt, which balances it out. So you're going to have a lot of flavors dancing on your tongue, and it's so much better, I think.
It was a real realization at Wildseed. We saw more desserts sell there than any other restaurant. In that group, there's something like 28 restaurants. And it just, desserts fly there. It was wild. We couldn't keep up with the demand.
Wow.
That's true. We really couldn't. We couldn't. A team of like 50 cooks, and we couldn't keep up with the demand. It was amazing.
If you want to create a more receptive body, free from toxins, inflammation, and metabolic issues, would it be crazy for you to explore booking an Ayurvedic consultation with me? There's probably never been a more perfect time to do it. Every day you wait matters when it comes to your health. So if you're ready to get your body back in balance, I'll give you a 30-day plan to get you started. Go to heathergrish.com to book a consultation. That's Heather, GRZYCH.com. That is so fascinating. Actually, when I make a recipe at home, I always cut the sugar at least 25%. So I love that 30% is your number, and it gives me like the courage to go even lower in cutting the sugar. And yes. I love the texture that you're making me very hungry, first of all.
Perfect.
And sweets, they're my weakness. I can't resist a sweet.
That and beef jerky?
Yes. Well, the beef jerky I don't do. It's been about 11 years since I've done beef jerky. But, at the time, for sure. So Blair, I've seen you tinkering in the kitchen, sort of like an artist or a chemist would, or a musician creating, a piece of music. As a chef, there's a lot of development work that goes into the creating of a recipe. Could you talk a little bit about that process?
Sure. I mean, I touched on it a little bit earlier. It was trying to first really looking at picking an ingredient or picking a salad or whatever it is, kind of honing in on a few flavor profiles I'd like to touch on. But it's more in that making it approachable and thinking about salads. All right, what are the world's best-selling salads and how can I make them more vegan or how can I make them plant-based? There's the
miso Caesar, yes.
The miso Caesar's in the book, replacing anchovies for Caesar with miso. I've done that one for years. And now there's Parmesan that's actually pretty decent, plant-based Parmesan, or you can use the Bragg's Brewer's yeast flakes, work pretty well. But I'm really just looking holistically at the whole dish. Is it going to have enough protein? And what we learned from the philosophies at the restaurant in developing recipes, are customers going to be satisfied? Is this going to satiate you? And hit all the little buzzy things that you're looking for in a restaurant experience. You take that and start putting it into a book and you've really got something. The different textures, different colors. If you look at the cover of the book, it's just full of colors. Everything is just packed full of colors. So, rather than just plain white cauliflower, we're going to use the green cauliflower or the purple cauliflower. And I think that's made a big difference with the dishes, how everything you're really eating the rainbow.
Another thing is that if like traditionally carb heavy dishes like paella and pasta that are, those dishes would be predominantly rice and noodles respectively. I love this about Blair's technique is that you reduce the amount of that carb and up the amount of vegetables. So there's a bolognese that has less noodles, but a lot more mushrooms in the sauce. And even the miso Caesar that you just mentioned, it's the kale and the dressing, but then you put tons of grilled veggies in there. I love that.
So, the same approach with any of the dishes that if there's a sauce, make it saucy. You don't want it to be drenched in sauce or anything, but make it accessible so that put more sauce on the plate down so that you regulate how much you want and it's your experience. And with the greens, how many times have you gotten a salad somewhere and it's just, it
has like one tomato on it.
Yeah, one sad tomato or whatever. And so, that's the last thing I want. If we're trying to convince people to eat more of this, you really have to lean into the appeal.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I feel like people say that there are certain things that they can't get from eating plant-based that they get from eating meat. And I guess when I think about it, maybe is it texture? Is it flavor? What do you think it is? Do you think it's texture and flavor or just the idea that they're eating this?
Yeah. That's a great question. This is what we saw when that group of us switch to eating plant-based for 30 days. And we're, being competitive in restaurants. We're out eating other restaurants, checking out things. Who are the top people in San Francisco and just other places we were. I mean,
it's umami, right?
Well, umami is a big part of it. And so adding umami, or a lot of the dishes we add stock to. And so rather than, I found this great product, and the Better Than Bouillon brand stuff I think is great for home cooking, but they do a no chicken stock. And I put that in so many dishes in the book because it adds that little umami, something, that meaty sort of flavor that you want in there that is missing in a lot of these plant-based things.
Mm-hmm.
I remember seeing it, I remember Laurent Gras, he's a famous Michelin 3-star chef. He uses chicken stock in his vinaigrettes. And so sometimes I'll put something like that. That's why the miso works so well in the Caesar salad. It hits you. And the Parmesan has a lot of umami to it.
Tomato sauce has umami. Yeah. Mushrooms have a ton of umami. So I think he's really intentional about making sure there's something bringing in that richness and depth of flavor that is in every meat dish. There are definitely ways that you can put it into vegetarian cooking. You just have to be really intentional about it.
Yeah. And, it goes back to balancing the dish. And we even have a whole section in here. I don't know if you've had a chance to flip through it, but balancing your flavors. And what if something is too salty or too sweet or whatever? There's options. What if you can't find in every dish or every recipe? We try to give you some options. If you can't, you're stuck in, somewhere more remote, you can't find those ingredients that you're looking for, you can sub something in.
There's an inherent flexibility in vegetarian cooking because you can often substitute one vegetable for another.
Yeah. It works well.
So that's so fascinating. In Ayurveda school, we were taught about 6 tastes. And umami was not one of them. So I'm always fascinated by umami because I'm always trying to understand. I have an understanding, like, what happens when you eat something sour? Like, you just feel your mouth salivate, right? You feel all that liquid moving.
It's like it dries out your mouth almost.
And she was saying the opposite, actually.
Oh, well.
Well, what do you feel? What do you feel?
For me, it kind of like dries it out initially, and then it gets it wet, right? It's a response.
Oh, yeah, the tannic. There's a tannic nature to some citrus.
It's like a response, the tannic thing, yeah.
Interesting.
Sort of sour and bitterness.
Yeah, and bitterness, exactly. So like bitter and sour and pungent or spicy, and then we learned salty, and we learned astringent. Like, so astringent would be like a bean or alcohol, something that tightens. Like if you put something astringent on a tissue, it tightens it. And it can have like a chalkiness to it. Like spinach has a little bit of that as well. But we were not taught about umami. And it's interesting because also, we were talking earlier about in Ayurveda, do we recommend meat, for example, or not recommend meat, because a lot of people do have an understanding that Ayurvedic cooking is all vegetarian. And it's interesting because Ayurveda will use meat as a medicine. So if a person is depleted, if a person's body is depleted, then meat is called for as a medicine. Depleted in the sense that the tissues themselves are depleted. Not that like they're too tired to go to work today or something like that kind of depleted, but the tissues that have formed in their body themselves are not developed enough, we'll say, that meat would be one food that you could give for that. But otherwise, it's not necessary. Yeah.
So, yeah, it would be animal protein rather than just protein in general, like you would find from beans or something like that.
Exactly. And it's interesting because we have also in Ayurveda a different way of looking at the qualities of food. So we don't count calories. We don't look at protein. We look at like, is it dense or is it liquid? Is it hot or is it cold? Like kind of more of this qualitative approach to things. Yeah, we'll have to geek out on that sometimes, Blair. I know that we've talked about it a little bit. But this umami thing is really fascinating to me. And does umami that taste originate anywhere? Or do you find it pretty universally in most cultures' foods?
I'd say it's in
universal.
Yeah, I'd say it's pretty universal.
I mean, the items known to have it are tomatoes, mushrooms, cooked onions, Parmesan cheese, that's mostly Italian.
Yeah.
I mean, the term umami is a Japanese term. So there was, I guess it was a Japanese scientist that kind of discovered it and coined that term. Right. And then MSG is actually manufactured umami.
Yeah.
So now that I think about it, it probably has to do with the salt content that creates that savoriness and addictiveness. Because food with deep umami is addictive. It's the kind of food that you can't stop eating because it just tastes so good.
Yeah, like beef, chefs, we have a saying, so beef loves salt. So, if you eat beef without seasoning, it's going to taste much sweeter and not as satisfying, not as satiating. And you add that salt and it just totally changes it. And then the umami really comes out.
Yeah.
So maybe it is activated with salt.
Yeah. I mean, soy sauce is umami too, right?
Right.
So there you go.
Parmesan's pretty salty. And it could have some parallels. I don't know. I'm not a scientist.
So yeah, I do think, to answer your question, that umami is in every cultural cuisine. And it's probably because it's innately what makes food taste addictively delicious.
Sure.
Oh my God. Apparently salt is also like that too, because have you ever read that book Salt by Mark Kurlansky?
Yes. I've heard of it, but I haven't read it.
It's such a good book. But apparently I think it was in ancient Egypt, the priests were not allowed to eat salt because it was thought that it would evoke sexual desire.
Oh, interesting. I get it. There's there's definitely a crossover in that Venn diagram.
Exactly. I don't know why anybody would think that food wouldn't affect us. Come on, So it's just like when we can get this, like a new creative angle to really evaluate and explore foods like your book is doing for people is so great. And I want to ask you guys, because I know you have a kid the same age as mine, what kinds of things do you think we can do to get kids to eat more plants?
I think it's a lot. I don't know. Well, I can only speak from one experience. That's our son. So he has always kind of leaned towards plant-based eating anyways. I remember trying to get him a long time ago, trying to get him to eat a steak with me, and he wouldn't touch it. And I know, he just leans toward, he prefers plant-based eating.
My trick for plants with him is have a lot of butter and salt on it. Yeah. I made zucchini with butter and salt on it the other day, and he loved it. He crushed it.
Yeah. Broccoli.
But each kid is different, Like I know some of my friends' children only like steamed vegetables, and they just have to be steamed to death so that they're very easy to chew. And then the child will eat them. So I think it's just about continuing to expose your kid to it, modeling it. Children do what they see their parents do when they're at a young age, and then just playing to what they like. So if you see them reacting to butter and salt on a vegetable, great. Give them that. Do that. Go with the flow.
I like sneaking in some broccoli in the mac and cheese.
He loves broccoli. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know Gabriel loves broccoli too, right? I remember that.
Yeah.
That's pretty much one of the only vegetables he'll eat, but we can't do the sneaky thing. If he sees it in there, he's like, no, you trying to fool me here. I'm not going after that.
Yeah, James is starting to go in that direction too.
He knows. But I just say, well, you got to eat it, bud. That's it. The end.
Well, you mentioned like when we were children, I don't know, do you remember being a child yourself? And I actually did not like meat when I was a child, and was the child who was at the dinner table where my father would be like, you're not leaving this table until you finish everything on your plate. And I was sitting there going, I don't really like anything on this plate.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I don't know. I also, moved 3,000 miles away from my family, stuff like that. Maybe there's more to that idea, but but do you remember actually liking what your parents cooked when you were a child?
Yes. I crushed meat when I was a kid. I loved it. I used to eat an 8-piece drumstick from Roy Rogers. That was like a weekly meal for me. So the fact that I'm now a vegetarian is like shocking even to me. I feel like, we grew up in the 80s and 90s when mass produced meat was a thing that people didn't even raise an eyebrow at. And actually we talk about in the book how unhealthy our diets were when we were kids from a now retrospective perspective, and how we've kind of both done our own personal 180s, and that's okay. And everyone really should be on their own journey with this.
Carolyn's predominantly, she is plant-based, but I think you have a little bit of butter every once in a while or something? What's your Achilles heel?
I eat ghee and butter.
Okay.
And honey. and figs. Some things that very staunch vegans wouldn't eat.
Yeah. Do you know this, the fig thing? I always found it interesting.
I have no idea what you're talking about. When she just said that, I was like, what?
Figs sometimes in the fruiting process become carnivorous with insects, meaning insects will get trapped inside the fruiting body. So it's viewed as a carnivorous plant. And so sometimes some diehards won't eat figs, which kind of blows my mind. But
such a fun fact.
Yeah. Anyways.
Well, that's a really fun fact. And that might actually get me to get my child to eat a fig because he's obsessed. My child is obsessed with, exactly. He's obsessed with bugs eating things and killing other bugs. And
Him and James could totally bond on that.
I know. He'd probably, that's true.
Okay, so this book is out, and tell us how there's the book, but, if people want to get in touch with you about the book, or, what's the best way for people to connect with you? Is it through the book?
They can connect with us on Instagram. We have an Instagram account, Eat Plants Every Day. So if people want to reach out to us directly, they could reach out to us there. But through the book, read the book. We hope you love it, and we hope it sparks adventure. I think having a sense of adventure with it is really what it's all about. Just have fun with it and realize that there's no rules. You can have one salad from it and then eat a cheeseburger the next day, and that's fine. This book is not about judging lifestyles. It's about just exposure and fun and making incremental changes in a way that feels good.
And I mean, there's a range of complexity with the dishes too. I mean, some are something you could make any night in 20 minutes, and then other stuff are going to take a couple hours to put together. But and within each recipe, I lay out a component called the plan, and that gives you the gist of what you're going to what you're in for. Mm-hmm. It sets that up. I mean, you're going to do these steps, and then it goes into the more detailed steps once you start cracking into it. But
well, we are very lucky to have this book, and I'm very lucky to have this conversation with you, and I'm excited to go to my farmer's market this weekend and see what I find and what I can cook up from the book. So I want to thank both you guys for being here and on the wisdom of the body and sharing this information about your book.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks, Heather.
Thank you for tuning in and dropping in with us today. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. I really want to hear your feedback. To learn more about my work, visit heathergrish.com. That's Heather, GRZYCH.com. And meet me here next time on The Wisdom of the Body.